My dear, some wounds wear lipstick and pearls. And this one. My son's bride mocked me in front of everyone, but she didn't know I was a millionaire. Well, it left a mark not even time dared touch. Before we settle in, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd tap that subscribe button, leave a kind thought in the comments when we're done, and maybe share this with someone who's ever been underestimated by those who should have known better. Because sometimes dignity ain't loud, but it's rich in ways pride can't count. Now here's a truth I've lived long enough to see more than once. Folks reveal their hearts not by how they treat the powerful, but by how they treat the quiet ones they think have nothing left to offer. Let's begin. The chandelier glittered above us like 1,000 watching eyes, and her laugh, sharp, rehearsed, and soaked in champagne, cut through the room like a blade through silk. She stood beside my son, her gown hugging a body that knew mirrors too well, and with a smirk she didn't bother to hide, she said it. I told Daniel we didn't need to invite everyone, but he insisted. Even her. A few guests chuckled politely, unsure whether to pretend they didn't hear, or just follow her lead. My son, bless his heart, looked down at his shoes, then at me, mouthing a silent sorry across the white rose aisle. I held my purse a little tighter. Not for comfort. For what was inside. She didn't know. Not yet. That the woman she mocked owned the very vineyard she just got married on. That the pearls she ridiculed were real, older than her ego. That I, Ellie Whitford, had more grace in my pinky than she'd learn in a lifetime of etiquette classes. But I stayed quiet. Because sometimes, my dear, the most powerful thing you can do is let someone dig their own grave while you sip your tea. The morning after the wedding, I sat on the back porch with a spoonful of peach preserves, watching the mist rise off the fields like old ghosts stretching their arms. Muffin, my tabby, curled on my lap, purring like forgiveness. The silence was gentle, like it always is after you choose dignity over fury. The vineyard had been in my late husband's family for 3 generations, passed down not just in paperwork, but in prayers and calloused hands. I'd kept my name off the public records, preferred quiet stewardship to flaunting. But last night, mercy me, I considered breaking that vow. My son hadn't seen me cry. That was on purpose. But in the bathroom mirror at 1:03 a.m., I let the salt sting fall. Not because of her words. I've weathered worse. But because I saw in Daniel's eyes shame. And love tangled in it. She humiliated me, yes. But worse, she'd stolen a piece of how he saw me. And that couldn't stand. My dear, before we can understand the depth of a bruise, we need to know the softness it struck. Daniel was my youngest, born under the wisteria bloom, quiet as a whisper but bright as spring lightning. His daddy used to call him our little diplomat, 'cause even as a boy, he could calm a room with a glance. He had his father's patience and my tendency to watch before speaking, a dangerous mix when it comes to matters of the heart. We raised our children on the vineyard, acres of muscadine and scuppernong stretching toward the South Carolina sky. My husband, Thomas, had turned a family legacy into something quietly grand, and when cancer took him, I buried my grief between the grapevines and turned sorrow into soil. I never flaunted what we had. Folks in Charleston knew me as the retired schoolteacher who still wore cardigans in August and brought lemon bars to the town hall. I liked it that way. Daniel left for college in Chicago and stayed gone longer than I liked. He'd call every Sunday, his voice a string between us, taut but true. "Mama, I met someone," he said one autumn. "She's amazing. Sophisticated. You're gonna love her." Well, I tried, my dear. I surely did. Her name was Vanessa. She walked into my life like perfume. Expensive, cloying, impossible to ignore. She wore red lips and sharper words, and from the first handshake, I could feel her sizing me up like an estate she wasn't sure she wanted to renovate. Still, I welcomed her with homemade cornbread and a smile that cost me more than she knew. At first, she played polite, asked about the vineyard like it was a novelty, a curiosity. "So quaint," she'd say, looking around like she was on a movie set. I let it slide, the way older women do when they see the fight ain't worth the bruise. But over time she got bolder, corrected me at dinner, laughed a little too loudly when I mentioned my quilting circle. And Daniel, poor sweet Daniel, would just squeeze my hand under the table, like an apology wrapped in warmth. I told myself she was just nervous. That city folks don't always know how to soften their edges. Then came the wedding. She insisted on hosting it at a charming southern venue. Never once asked if I owned the land her glossy brochure showed. I kept my name out of it. The vineyard was listed under a holding company. Only Daniel knew. And he, bless his trust, never told her. She planned every detail down to the flavor of the frosting and the width of the aisle runners. When I offered to help, she smiled and said, "Oh, Eleanor, I think we've got it covered. You can just enjoy." Mercy me, I almost choked on that sugar-dipped dismissal. But I stayed quiet. Because sometimes, my dear, the storm waits. 3 days before the wedding, the florist called me in a panic. "Miss Whitford, I just got a call from Vanessa. She's canceling all the gardenias and wants synthetic peonies instead." I didn't want to. I cut her off gently. "It's all right, Marla. Do what the bride wants." But when I hung up, I stared out the kitchen window a long time. Gardenias were Daniel's favorite, always had been. I used to tuck one behind his ear when he was little, just to make him giggle. He'd come home from school with it still there sometimes, like a secret between us. She was wiping those memories away like chalk from a slate. Still, I held my tongue. But the final straw, mercy me, it came the night of the rehearsal dinner. It was held under a white canopy strung with Edison bulbs, all very chic, as she liked to say. The catering smelled like rosemary and regret. I brought a lemon pie, placed it quietly on the dessert table, then stepped back into the shadows. I didn't mind being unseen. Not at first. But then Vanessa raised her glass. "I just want to thank everyone who made this possible. My parents, our wedding planner, and of course Daniel," she beamed. "And to our guests, we're so glad you could join us. Even the ones who," she turned to me full tilt, "even the ones who remind us how far we've come." There was a pause. A hush, like the room didn't know whether to laugh or gasp. She added with a giggle, "I mean, look at these pearls. Vintage is very in right now." I touched my neck. The pearls had been my mother's. Real heavy with memory. Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear. He reached for her hand, whispered something. She smiled and kissed his cheek like nothing happened. I left before dessert was served. That night, I walked the vineyard in the moonlight. I passed the old cedar bench where Thomas proposed to me. I thought of every harvest, every blister, every morning spent nursing vines so they'd bless us back. And I realized something right then under the stars. Silence wasn't grace anymore. It was complicity. I went into the office and pulled the original deed, the one with my name. And I made a phone call. One that would make sure the wedding proceeded exactly as she planned, but with one little twist she'd never see coming. The morning of the wedding arrived swathed in golden mist, the kind of light that makes even regret look romantic. Guests shuffled in with programs fanned like prayer books, smiling at the vineyard's beauty without knowing whose hands had shaped it. I wore my soft blue dress, the one Thomas always said made my eyes look like the low-country sky before rain. I pinned on my cameo brooch, fastened my pearls, and tucked a folded letter into my clutch. Vanessa didn't notice me at first. She was too busy posing in front of the grand oak, veil flung back like a curtain in some vanity play. Photographers circled her like moths to a rhinestone flame. Daniel stood nearby, smile brittle, eyes scanning the crowd, looking for me maybe, or just a place to breathe. When she did see me, her gaze slid down like I was something she meant to sweep up later. She didn't speak, just offered a nod and turned back to her entourage. But the caterer did come find me. "Miss Whitford," he whispered, "we received a change in payment instructions. Everything's now being handled through a new account." "That's right," I said softly. "I own the venue. I'm footing the bill. Carry on." He blinked, lips parted like he wanted to ask more, but thought better of it. The whisper of that revelation rippled through the staff like wind through a cornfield. Still, I said nothing to Vanessa. Because sometimes power sits in silence until the moment after the applause. The ceremony unfolded with practiced perfection. She walked the aisle like a model on a Paris runway, basking in attention she mistook for admiration. Daniel waited with that nervous smile he wore in every school play, the one that always made me squeeze his hand backstage. And then came the reception. Vanessa took the mic. "Before we begin, I just want to thank everyone again for being here, especially those who traveled from out of state, and those who represent tradition. She glanced at me and several heads turned too. You've all seen the vineyard today. Isn't it charming? Applause. I just want to say when Daniel and I picked this place, we didn't realize it came with such character. A smattering of laughter. I stood then, slowly, and walked toward the microphone. Daniel's eyes widened. Vanessa's froze, lips half smiling like she wasn't sure what I was doing. May I? I asked, gesturing gently. She hesitated. Then with a tight smile handed it over. I turned to the guests. Thank y'all for being here. I'm Ellie Whitford, Daniel's mama, and the owner of this land, this vineyard and every brick you're standing on today. Silence. Vanessa blinked. I kept quiet, I continued, voice steady, because I wanted today to be about love, but love, my dear friends, can't bloom where there's contempt. Then I turned to Vanessa. I wish you well, truly, but I'd like to remind you, pearls are made when something irritates an oyster long enough for it to become beautiful. So if mine offend you, just know they've endured more than your opinions ever will. Gasps. Few laughs. One sharp clap. Daniel's best friend, I think. I handed the mic back and walked to the edge of the tent, heart thundering, hands calm. And Daniel? He followed me. He caught up to me just past the wisteria trellis, his footsteps fast, voice low and shaken. Mama, wait. I turned slow and still. He looked just like his father in that moment. Not the face, no, but the ache in his eyes. That quiet sorrow men carry when something sacred's been broken. I'm sorry, he said. I should have said something sooner. I just thought you'd let it go. Like you always do. I smiled, soft but firm. There's a difference between letting go and being stepped on, Daniel. He looked down, swallowing words. She's not always like that, he offered. Weakly. Oh, I know. Most people save their worst for when they think no one important's watching. I touched his cheek. But baby, if she can't honor your mama on your wedding day, how's she gonna honor you when no one's clapping? He didn't answer. Just stood there, caught between loyalty and clarity. Behind us, the music resumed. Laughter drifted in on waves of champagne and self-importance. But in that little pocket of shade, something shifted. I don't want to lose you, he said, barely above a whisper. You won't, I replied. But if you lose yourself in pleasing people who don't respect you, that's a loss I can't fix. And then it happened. Vanessa came storming through the trellis, veil now removed, face flushed not with bridal glow but with fury. How dare you hijack my reception? She snapped. I turned slowly. How dare I tell the truth? That I own the land your designer heels are sinking into? That I've smiled through insult after insult for months because I thought maybe, just maybe, you loved my boy enough to respect his roots. She laughed harsh, brittle. You think this is about land? You think money makes you important? I looked at Daniel. No, honey. But character does. Then I looked back at her. And you showed yours when you mocked me. You made a public meal of private cruelty. I just handed the plate back. Guests were beginning to murmur. Some walked closer. Others walked away. Daniel stepped between us. Vanessa, he said slowly, why did you lie about choosing this place? She blinked. What? You told me you wanted this vineyard because it was classy. You never once said it was because of my mama. And now you're embarrassed she's the one who made this day possible. I didn't know. But now you do, he cut in. And what you did wasn't just disrespectful. It was mean, unnecessary, and cruel. The silence that followed was a canyon. Then his voice broke, softer but stronger. I don't know what kind of marriage we'd have if this is how you treat the people who love me. She stood frozen, mouth parted. And Daniel turned back to me. I need to think, Mama, about all of this. I touched his hand. Take your time, baby. The truth always waits. The reception fizzled like a July sparkler left in the rain. Guests, unsure of the new script, milled about with awkward smiles and half-finished flutes of rose. The band played a soft instrumental, unsure whether to lean toward celebration or funeral dirge. The air was thick with tension, not loud, but crackling, like a storm just out of sight. Vanessa disappeared. One of her bridesmaids, a cousin I think, came up to me near the hydrangeas and said, "She's in the bridal suite, crying." Her tone didn't beg sympathy, just offered it like an afterthought. Daniel sat alone for a long while under the magnolia tree, jacket off, tie undone, elbows on knees like a boy who'd just been told Santa wasn't real. I didn't approach. Sometimes, a mother's love knows when not to hover. It wasn't until the cake was being quietly boxed up and centerpieces started to vanish that Daniel walked back over to me. She said I embarrassed her. I tilted my head gently. Did she say why? He looked out across the fields. She said she didn't know who I really was, that I didn't tell her how much you meant to this place. To me. I gave a sad smile. Sounds like she didn't ask. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I thought I loved her. I didn't say what came to mind. That real love doesn't shrink you to fit into someone else's life. Instead, I said, maybe you did. But love that survives, it's got to breathe the same air as truth. And then mercy me, he said something I'll never forget. She made me feel small in the one place I've always felt big. My heart cracked clean in two. You are never small here, I whispered, reaching for his hand. Not with me. Not on this land. Not ever. That night, the celebration dwindled into polite departures. No bouquet toss. No send-off. Just the clink of silverware being packed away, and the distant chirp of cicadas reclaiming their place in the silence. Vanessa left in a town car. No kiss. No speech. No apology. Daniel watched her go, then turned to me. Can I stay at the house tonight? I nodded. And as we walked the gravel path back toward the old farmhouse, his hand in mine, I knew this wasn't the end of a wedding. It was the beginning of something else entirely. The farmhouse was quiet, except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock and the soft hum of crickets beyond the screen door. Daniel stood at the mantel, gazing at the old black and white photo of his daddy holding him as a baby, grape stains on his overalls, joy on his face. He looked smaller in that moment than I'd ever seen him. Not physically, no, but in the way a soul curls up when it's trying to reckon with itself. I don't know who I am without her, he said finally, voice raw, eyes shining. I set down the tea-I'd brewed, chamomile and lemon balm, the same blend I used to give him when he was a boy afraid of thunder. You were someone long before she arrived, Daniel, I said gently, and you'll still be someone when her shadow passes. He sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I kept thinking if I just smoothed the edges, if I just didn't rock the boat. Baby, I interrupted softly, you became the boat she stood on, steadying her while she rocked you. That hit him. I saw it in the way his shoulders dropped. The air hissed from his lungs like a long-held breath. She said I wasn't ambitious enough. That being tied to the vineyard was small thinking. I sat beside him, laying a hand over his. Let me tell you what small thinking looks like. Dismissing your roots, scorning kindness, mistaking wealth for worth. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the fireplace. Did I make a mistake, Mama? Mercy me, I wanted to say yes, plain and clean. But life ain't a ledger. It's a field, messy, rich, sometimes full of weeds that look like flowers, till they choke out the good things. You loved with what you had, I said. That's never a mistake. But now you get to decide what kind of love you want next. He looked at me, truly looked. And I saw it then, the beginning of unlearning. Of untangling the parts of himself he'd twisted to fit her shape. We didn't speak much more that night. Just sipped tea and watched the moonrise stretch across the floor like a blessing. But before he went upstairs, he paused. Thank you, he said, for not letting me forget who I am. Daniel stayed for a week. Not in his old room, but in the guest room that looked out over the east field. The one that catches morning light like a secret. Each sunrise, I'd hear the kettle whistle, the front door creak, then see him through the window, walking the vines like his father used to. At first it was aimless. A man wandering his own history. But by the third day, he started carrying a notebook. Sketching layouts. Making calls. Asking questions. Mama, he said one evening, what if I came back for good? I didn't answer right away. I just handed him a bowl of tomato bisque, and watched his face like a prayer I wasn't ready to speak aloud. He smiled. I think I forgot what this felt like. Being home. Not just visiting it. Over the next few days, we walked the land together. I showed him the ledger where I kept records, handwritten, just like his daddy taught me. We stood under the arbor where I once held him as a baby and whispered promises I hadn't shared with anyone in years. He told me he called Vanessa. She said she needed someone more polished, more driven. I raised an eyebrow. Driven where? He laughed, for the first time in days. Exactly. There was no bitterness in his voice, just clarity, like someone who'd finally stepped out of a room where the walls had been whispering the wrong name. One morning he surprised me. I want to co-run the vineyard. Not just help, build something with you. Maybe expand. Try that wine tasting room you used to dream about. I blinked near tears. You remember that? Of course. You used to draw it on napkins after dinner. That night we sketched floor plans by candlelight, jazz playing low on the record player, Muffin curled at our feet like an old soul satisfied. We didn't talk about Vanessa again. Not because we were pretending she hadn't mattered, but because we'd finally remembered who mattered more. The tasting room opened 6 months later. A modest space with wide bay windows, hand-carved woodwork, and vines trained to curl just outside the glass like watchful elders. We called it the Whitford table after a phrase Thomas used to say, "There's always room at our table, if you bring truth and a clean heart." Daniel poured the first bottle at our soft opening. It was a muscadine blush we'd named Eleanor's Mercy. When I asked why that name, he just smiled and said, "Because you could have burned the whole wedding to the ground, but instead you planted seeds." Word spread fast, as it does in Charleston. Locals came by out of curiosity, then stayed for the stories. Tourists took photos not just of the wine, but of the handwritten quotes lining the walls, bits of old Whitford wisdom Daniel insisted we include. And then one afternoon Vanessa came. I saw her through the glass before she stepped inside. Heels lower than I remembered, eyes not as sharp. She walked up to the counter, looked around and said, "It's beautiful." Daniel was in the back. I stepped forward. "Thank you." She hesitated. "I didn't know about all this." "No," I said calmly. "You didn't ask." She opened her mouth, closed it again, then nodded. "I'm sorry for how I treated you, for missing the point." I didn't smile, but I didn't harden either. We all miss things when we're busy trying to prove ourselves. She bought a bottle of Eleanor's Mercy and left without asking for a tour. Daniel never brought it up when he returned to the front. He didn't need to. Some truths don't require retelling. They just bloom quietly, like wildflowers in soil once scorched. And my dear, if you'd seen my son that day, apron dusted in flour from fresh biscuits he'd baked for our guests, laughter worn like armor finally laid down, you'd know what I knew. He had come home to himself. On Sunday mornings now, we sit on the porch with matching mugs. His says grower, mine says matriarch, and watch the sun rise over the rows of vines we've both bled and prayed into. Daniel reads the paper, always skipping the finance section, and Muffin hops from lap to lap like she's choosing a favorite. The world still spins fast beyond the gravel road, but here, time waltzes. Every so often, a new couple comes to tour the vineyard. They ask about the wines, the history, the soil. And sometimes, they ask about the name Eleanor's Mercy. Daniel never tells them everything. He just says, "It's named after my mother. She taught me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is forgive someone who never said thank you." And I pour them a glass, watch their eyes soften, and think to myself, mercy is best served chilled, with a quiet dignity that needs no spotlight. Because in the end, my dear, respect isn't demanded. It's grown, like good fruit in season. If my son's bride mocked me in front of everyone, but she didn't know I was a millionaire, echoed anything inside your own story, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd leave a comment below and let me know what part stayed with you. Pass this tale along to someone who's ever been underestimated or forgotten just how much they're worth. And if you'd like to sit with me again sometime soon, you know where to find me. Subscribe, my dear. The next story's just waiting to be told.